When I was 14 years old, I had a dream. A dream that nearly a decade later, I couldn't forget. I felt it was my destiny to be a professional wrestler on national TV. A decade later, I finally made it. Or so I thought. In less than a year, it was over.
Right, so you disappear, you're off television, you're done. What's the story?
And nobody knew why.
I think a lot of people have read on the internet that I've got hepatitis C, and everybody else thinks I've just got brain damage. So.
This is the story of my final tour. On the shows where I started, with the people I knew.
No, I can't wrestle anymore. Please feel sorry for me.
It was the last time I'd ever wrestle. The last chance to say goodbye. The last hope for a resolution. The last of McGuinness.
This is Jay Briscoe here, and you're watching the Wrestling Roundtable, the best damn wrestling show on the whole damn internet. If you ain't watching it, you ain't manning up.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. Share, rate, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy our shows, and lots of you have over the years, and we're glad. And we always get new fans who just discover us, and wow, we've got all these old shows to look through. And a lot of our old shows are over at Blog Talk Radio, so go over to BTR and check out our old shows in audio form. But of course, we're all over YouTube, and a lot of us are on Go Fight Live as well. Now switching back to Rodney LeConte as we go to Ring of Honor, and we've had some requests to talk about Ring of Honor. A lot like TNA last year, it was their 10th year in existence, and as I hinted at the beginning of the show, I was with Ring of Honor for the majority of it, actually. The first couple years I was going as a fan, and then I got hired in the office because I was training under CM Punk as a student, and then I have this other skill, videography, and about a week and a half after training in October '04, I got a job, and it grew from there. In training, after a couple months, I got hurt, fractured a couple ribs, and then I segued into full-time. Then I was on the road. I was also doing ring crew while I was hurt because I was a student, paying my dues, all that bullshit. And then taking over DVDs, and if you ever watched the Video Wire, I did all of those, good or bad. Did a lot of the comps, and did a lot of work for Ring of Honor that hopefully you enjoyed, especially those welcome videos. I was very proud of those and the roster videos. I know a lot of it may not have been the greatest because it was a lot of rush jobs too. But Ring of Honor itself has an interesting origin because one of the first things I was going to ask is, Ring of Honor gets compared to ECW a lot, of course, because of its origin, maybe because of its budget or how it looks, and its style. But ECW really kind of is the origin of Ring of Honor because it was RF Video, the king of the bootleggers, and not even a good one. I ordered once the Pillman Memorial Show 2000 because of all the great matches, especially the Benoit Regal one, and I got like this 8th generation bullshit bootleg from RF Video. It fucking sucked. Never bought one again. But that's how RF Video really got started, bootlegging shit. ECW house shows and comps from Japan and stuff. Lots of lawsuits there too with Pride and whatnot. But essentially, they were working with ECW. After ECW went under, they're like, well, let's start our own promotion, essentially. And so him and the office crew got together and started Ring of Honor. And the idea was, at least that was my first impression of it, the buzz on the internet in 2001 as it was coming to a close was Ring of Honor was going to be starting up, and it's going to be pure wrestling. It's going to be all the great technical, no bullshit stuff that you've heard about, sports entertainment. And of course, they start the first show with Christopher Street connections, so it's kind of out the window there, and Carnage Crew matches and stuff. But especially in the main events, when you've got guys like Low-Ki and Christopher Daniels and AJ Styles. See, before Ring of Honor started, I assumed, well, I've been going to indies a lot because that to me was like the golden age of indies. In the waning days of the Monday Night Wars, and there were a lot of great indies cropping up, at least in the tri-state area. And I thought, well, who's going to be in this new thing? And I thought of the names that I knew, like the SATs, Red and the Maximos, Low-Ki, AJ Styles, Bryan Danielson. I just saw American Dragon at JCW at the Rexplex, not even in the main room where Ring of Honor would run away in the back.
Homicide and all them.
Yeah, and it was a lot of JPW guys, and it did end up being a lot of those indie names with buzz. And bringing all those names together was great. However, as we'll find out as we go along, it's not sustainable with that sort of budget. It took about another year for Kerry Silkin to buy into the company, and good thing he did, because another year after that, a week before WrestleMania or so in 2004, NBC 10 shows up at Rob Feinstein's door, or someone else's door, I guess. And
Was it Chris Hansen?
he's fucking lucky it wasn't. If it was a couple years later, he would have been in a lot of trouble. So that went out the window, and then there was a transition, and I came in after that transition was done. And then from there, Ring of Honor really took off. Names like Samoa Joe, Bryan Danielson again. He was doing a lot of international shows at the beginning, and this was more grounded for him. CM Punk, of course, Colt Cabana. It was a really well-rounded roster. And especially at the top, when they started the CZW feud, that to me was like pretty much the hype. And if you look at the numbers, I'm pretty sure it would be business-wise also hitting on all cylinders. So they had a lot of good buzz around it. But after a while, they wanted to get on TV. That was the main thing for them. And they changed up several bookers over the next few years. They tried getting on HDNet when that was pretty much the best option for them, and I don't think it was a good one. Then they broke into iPay-per-view, which was a great idea, but then, as we've seen in the last year, they were plagued with technical difficulties, and that really kills fan loyalty and fan support and really trust in the company in a way, and they've gotten their stride with that lately. And that's really what they've been based on. Now, of course, they're owned by Sinclair Broadcasting, and that's syndicated television, not cable or anything else like that. So they're in a very unique position now. They're still known as the wrestling company. You look at us for 5-star matches and stuff like that. But that's where it differs from ECW to me. And breaking into the first question about, do you think these comparisons to ECW are accurate? I don't. Do you?
To a degree, I mean, they each have their own niche audience, their diehard fan base. One thing that struck me that's very similar between the ROH and ECW was during, say, ROH's heyday, the entrance music. ECW had Sandman coming out to Sandman, and they had American Dragon coming out to Final Countdown, and the crowd just ate it up. It was crazy.
But as you get on TV, you're not going to fly under the radar anymore, getting away using copyrighted music and stuff, and so it switches. But it really did change, I felt, the dynamic of Ring of Honor, because one of the great aspects that Ring of Honor had that was unique was those entrances and slamming on the guardrails and stuff like that. And that kind of got taken away when the music changed. But when I hear these ECW comparisons a lot, which is a natural idea based on the location and the style, I guess, I think, are they like ECW? The answer is no, in both good and bad ways. No, they're not like ECW at all, because the wrestling is a lot better. As opposed to ECW, because we talked about it on this show here, I think a lot of it does not hold up years later, bell to bell. But while Ring of Honor may have a lot better wrestling that may stand the test of time, they can't touch ECW as far as personalities. ECW, you think of Taz promos, you think of the gangsters, and maybe the matches may not have been that great, but the characters you connected to somehow. Raven. And if you think about it in these terms, think of all the great memorable promos alone in ECW. Just promos. Just someone talking to the camera. How many can Ring of Honor say they have? I can only think of 2. The Wrestle Wraith promo, This is Straight Edge with CM Punk, and Eddie Kingston when he was talking on the video wire going into a match with Chris Hero a few years ago. Because those are the guys that really connect with the camera, and I don't think a lot of Ring of Honor guys really do that. Obviously, guys like Colt Cabana is a personality, Homicide's a personality, but there's just not the same amount as there were in ECW. It didn't, I guess, have that nurturing. But if we're comparing it to ECW, you've been to ECW shows. What was it like going to a Ring of Honor show? Because you've been behind the scenes and in the crowd. How did that compare to ECW? What was it like going to Ring of Honor?
ECW crowd was a little older, I would say. Passion-wise, I think they were almost about the same. I would give the slight edge to ECW because, like you were just saying, ECW had established stars that brought validity to ECW. Shane Douglas, Bam Bam, and it's almost, once it got in ECW, the chains got let off, and you got to see them wrestle the way they want and their true personalities bring forth, and they really were able to connect to the camera.
And don't forget the sign of the times, too. Wrestling was hot back then.
That's true.
Wrestling was hot. ROH, the wrestling was a lot better. I think the live experience for ECW, just because of the songs and the entrances, I was watching on TV a long time before I got to an event. So to be there, you could feel the energy through the television in ECW. I don't think you would get that in ROH.
There's too much getting in the way.
There's too much, and it's very indie as far as
Indie!
But actually, as far as name value. A Pat's indie show, as far as like ECW.
Well, you talked about wrestling being hot back then, and we've talked about that a lot with the Monday Night Wars, and you look at the numbers, especially in '98, it's insane. Even though Nitro may have been losing to Raw, it was that close for a long time. And wrestling was hot. It's not right
Put
now.
up 7s and 8s, and now like put up 2s.
But I mean, ECW ascended to the level it did because of that momentum of wrestling, and Ring of Honor's had to battle against that. They're essentially appealing to the Wrestling Observer type audience that are concentrating on snowflakes and shit like that. And that's how we got our buzz on the internet, and that's fine and all. But is it enough? Where do you think Ring of Honor's place is? Because they keep trying to get bigger, right? They want to expand the product and get the name out there. But doing iPay-per-views, is this pretty much like as far as they're going to go? They're on syndicated TV. They still have whatever's left of that audience that may have been turned off by the technical difficulties. They still may come for the wrestling whenever it comes to town. But, I mean, ECW got on cable. Yeah. Do you see Ring of Honor ever getting to that level? What's its place in wrestling right now?
Unless there's a big spike in wrestling interest again, I doubt it. I really think they've gotten as far as they're going to go. They're a little too niche and a little too small scale, and they haven't like been able to have a star and keep a star.
Talking about what it was like going to Ring of Honor, you were also backstage doing security. I think you got on iPay-per-view as well.
All the guys are very nice. All the guys are really
right.
great. It's just a great experience.
What was it like for you as a fan getting involved in a brawl like that?
It was actually a lot of fun. I remember being backstage. We were waiting for our cue was for the mic kick out for Steen. So we're waiting for that. We're standing by next to the gate, and Cornette comes behind me and actually starts yelling at us. Like, get out there now. I'm like, oh, shit. So we run out there. He powerbombs Jimmy Jacobs on the fucking side of the ring, which looked painful as all hell.
That's something I don't like that they do a lot,
Yeah.
because I think that's pretty dangerous. That's a hard side of the ring on the apron, and it seems like they're trying to up themselves all the time, and I don't want to see someone get hurt doing
But
that
then
shit.
Generico jumps on me and lands on us, and I bruised my wrist. I couldn't grip anything for a couple of days, but that was a lot of fun.
You've been to Ring of Honor shows, and I remember you had a memorable experience at Final Battle 2006 when Homicide won the belt.
Yeah, it was a breath of fresh air because it was Homicide fighting Bryan Danielson. Match originally ended in run-ins and stuff. They continued the match. I was like, wow, this is great. They're not going to do a Raw ending. And then Homicide won the belt, and the crowd went nuts. I went nuts. The way Danielson gave him the belt, it was almost as if in the ring they threw his storyline, and he just gave him the belt. Like, here, man, you deserve it. Put on a great match. Thank you. And it was just a great moment, and I'm really glad I was at that show.
Well, we talked about the year in review and match of the year. People were still talking about Ring of Honor in that sense now, like Davey Richards defending the title against Michael Elgin in Florida, Showdown in the Sun Night 2, and Ring of Honor still seems to deliver in the main events for a lot of people. But like I mentioned, I've got a unique experience firsthand and behind the scenes in the office, at the shows, etc. So we're going to get some more insight into what it was like working in pro wrestling and specifically Ring of Honor when we come back.
Hi, this is the American Dragon Bryan Danielson, the best wrestler in the world, and you're watching the best wrestling talk show in the world, the Wrestling Roundtable.
Welcome back to the Wrestling Roundtable. We're switching up the format here. It's going to be different because, like I said, I've got a different perspective on Ring of Honor because I've worked in independent pro wrestling for over 8 years now. And that was the idea of the Roundtable, to bring different perspectives together. Someone who's a fan, referees, wrestlers, cameramen, I don't care. This is a big collective consciousness here. We want to be open to everybody and not dismiss any opinions, but everyone brings something different to the table. Roundtable. So what we're going to do here is, because I have this different experience and one-on-one experience with Ring of Honor, we're going to go to your questions as well, but questions from the other panelists. And to ask the questions is my man, Rodney LeConte. So
it's a pleasure to be going one-on-one with you.
Yes,
Eric.
it is. What's up first?
Orlando has the first question. Why didn't ROH bring in more international guys?
Well, of course, for several years there was a lot of influx of Japanese talent, specifically with Pro Wrestling Noah. And what people don't realize is, see, another one of your questions relates to this, and it's going to relate to our next show next week, too, on the internet wrestling community. And that's, what were some of your biggest preconceptions going into wrestling that changed in wrestling? And this is going to relate to that question from Orlando, because what people don't realize is they say industry and business all the time. Business, money. Do Do you know how much money it costs to run a wrestling show? We've had experience with Pro Wrestling Respect and we got an idea, but this is on a much bigger scale. When you're bringing in Japanese talent who are flying across the Pacific with a crew, that's not even including hotels, transportation, whatever they might be compensated, and their wrestler fee. We did a show in Virginia where the main event was No Remorse Corps versus 3 guys from Noah, Morishima, Go Shiozaki, and Marufuji. That's times 3 then. And of course, everyone varies depending on their experience and whatnot, to say nothing of Joe Kobashi when you got a legend like that coming in, Jushin Liger. So when you see these indies like Chikara or JPW doing Toyota and Liger and those sort of people, it's costing them a lot of money. So they've got to recoup that in DVD sales and ticket sales or pay-per-view sales or whatever. And after a while, if that's going to wear off, maybe, we've seen Kenta enough times and against all the people we want to see him in, it's just going to wear off after a while. So it just wasn't cost-effective, really.
Zach from Arkansas wants to know, how did ROH obtain great talent such as CM Punk and Samoa Joe?
Like a lot of things in life, word of mouth. Because especially when you're talking about the origin of Ring of Honor, when we're hearing some buzz about these guys in the Midwest like Hulk Hogan and CM Punk, they've had a lot of matches together, or Jimmy Jacobs and BJ Whitmer sort of things. They get suggested to bookers, people send in tapes, demos maybe, and that's generally where it comes from. I know they do camps now to scout talent and stuff like that, but I think history will show if you've got a friend, hey, can we get a dark match for this guy? And he's got his gear in the car like you always should, and get him a spot on the wrestling terms, pre-show, then that's really how it starts. It's really word of mouth. And of course, now in the age of the internet, you can find out a lot more.
Cool. Our own Will Brooks wants to know, who was the biggest potential star in ROH that didn't make it?
All right, well, I'm going to give 2 generalities. This is a specific answer that you want, of course. But I want to give 2 generalities first because I've always felt that the 2 types or groups of people that could have made a lot more impact in Ring of Honor and made money for Ring of Honor were women and students. I thought it was really wrong that the students go through the system, the Ring of Honor system, specifically the school, and not more is made of them, so to speak. Like Rhett Titus is doing all right for himself now, but he's pretty much by himself. It's generally bit player stuff like Mr. Ernesto Osiris and Bobby Dempsey, and regardless of whether you have an opinion on their skill or not, that's kind of like what we were trying to do in Pro Wrestling Respect, is give them more of a showcase. And PWX now in North Carolina is doing a good job with getting guys more spots than they normally would. And women too. For a long time, it was like the same 3 women against each other. How many times can Daisy Hayes, Sarah Del Rey, and Lacey wrestle each other for 5 years or whatever? And then you see an amazing match like Sarah Del Rey and Amazing Kong or Awesome Kong, whatever her indie name was, in New York. That was just great. And I know there's a lot of attractive, if not talented, women wrestlers out there, and we've seen women's only promotion. Shimmer, we should have been doing that before Shimmer was themselves. But for specific answers, I always liked Tank Toland. I thought they could have done a lot more with him. Rashi Brown, unfortunately, that didn't work out. He had a lot of potential. Both guys in ANX, especially Kenny King. When I would look at Kenny King, I'm like, how is this guy not signed yet? Of course, he's signed now, but I just mean like this was a major league talent. He had great in-ring skills. He had charisma out of the ass. And another one like that was Jack Evans. I know a lot of people didn't like his acrobatic style, but he was personality, he was unique, had a great look, and did the most amazing things I've ever seen someone do leaving 2 feet. And I'm glad that he's doing well in Mexico now in AAA, and that's his home now. But he had big star potential, and luckily a lot of guys who do make it in ROH. But there were some that we could have gone farther with Rocky Romero or something like that.
I haven't heard that name Jack Evans in a long time.
Well, he's been in Mexico.
Wow. Aaron from Maryland wants to know, who did the most to help out ROH? Was it Punk, was it Samoa Joe, or was it Bryan Danielson?
All 3 did a lot for Ring of Honor. And Bryan Danielson would probably be my favorite out of all those because his title reign especially was just great for solidifying everything that Ring of Honor was about. Punk, of course, cult of personality, he really was. When he was running the school, more people showed up for that because of him than anybody else. And he brought fans in with his aura and persona. But for helping out the company when it really needed it, it's got to be Samoa Joe. Because his almost 2-year title reign That was like the Bruno Sammartino of Ring of Honor to me. That was the way I always compared him and his role as champion in Ring of Honor, because that was the building block champion that was steady, steadfast, and got a lot of buzz around him, selling out MSG for Bruno or Frontier Fieldhouse in Chicago for Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe was our rock for a long time, and I don't mean the rock, I mean our foundation, and he was the guy that, when we needed it the most, was helping build up Ring of Honor.
Very good. So, from the round table, Rodney wants to know who from ROH who made it to one of the big companies, TNA or WWE, were you most proud of to see venture off?
Well, the reason I watch TNA is because I know a lot of those guys. So Samoa Joe, Austin Aries, Christopher Daniels, it's great seeing them in HD on cable every week, and they're doing all right. But of course, the big league is WWE. So Claudio and Bryan Danielson, Antonio Cesaro, those two guys in particular, they make me the most proud because they're great people, they're great wrestlers, and I know they've worked hard and they're pleasant people. So they really deserve all the success they get. So when Claudio was on TV, and I'm glad he's US champion now, that makes me happy because I know he's a good person too, in addition to being a talented, great wrestler. And especially when you watch WrestleMania, regardless of whether it lasted 18 seconds or not, when Bryan Danielson, and not much has really changed aside from the stupid name, but aside from that, it's essentially Bryan coming out in the same maroon robe and doing his wrestler warm-up sort of stuff, and he's grown immensely in support and talent, and it's just great seeing him walk out in front of tens of thousands of people reacting to him. That was a very proud moment for me as a fan and a friend.
Mark from Philly wants
he's
to know,
a good fan of ours.
What show elevated ROH above other indies?
Well, there's two that come to mind. One I was at and one I wasn't. Unified in England in the summer of '06. Our first international show across the ocean anyway, not Canada or whatever. This was in Liverpool, England. And the last two matches of the night were just some of the best matches we've ever had. Aries and Roderick Strong, tag team championship against the Briscoes. Amazing match. Unification between pure champion Nigel McGuinness and Bryan Danielson, also amazing. And those two back-to-back on our first show in England, that was like, wow, we're really something special. And along those lines was Glory by Honor 5, Night 2. I don't like these titles, but Night 2, which was in New York. That was one of the best shows. I think that's the best Ring of Honor show we ever had. And again, the last two matches especially, GHC World Champion, Heavyweight Champion, Naomichi Marufuji defending against Nigel McGuinness, and then Bryan Danielson defending against Kenta, which I think is the best match that Ring of Honor ever had. And Bryan was going through a shoulder injury at the time, a legit one. And I knew how much pain he was in through that whole thing. And he still had a masterful, amazing match with another great world-class wrestler. And that's the thing. That was the day before Unforgiven 2006. We went to Hooters and watched it. And it made me sick. That was the Cena Edge TLC bullshit.
I remember that.
And it opened with Nitro Hardy, I think. And I was like, motherfucker, like a day before, I'm looking at world-class international wrestlers. Britain, Japan, America. And they had amazing, great matches without one weapon, without one table spot, just by themselves. And then people were cheering for this shit.
And then we're watching DX versus McMahon's.
Right. And like people can talk about Jeff Hardy being a great high flyer and all that stuff, and that's nice he falls off things. But Jack Evans leaves his feet, twists in the air, in the ball, and lands on his feet in one motion effortlessly. So I wish more people could have seen his talent on a bigger scale. But anyway, top to bottom, Glory by Honor 5, Night 2, especially with Bruno Sammartino being there, which was a really classy thing that Bruno graced us with his presence. Of course, he's getting paid like every other indie he's appeared in. But still, the fact that it was New York and Ring of Honor on that scale, and Bruno came for us when he doesn't come for WWE. And then, of course, the great Morishima Joe pull apart and everything, which didn't interfere with Bruno's segment. But the matches made it. And that overall was just like, that was my proudest moment being in pro wrestling, that show.
Wow. Our Orlando wants to know, were there any surprises in ROH that did not happen?
Well, there were a few appearances that were going to happen and didn't. I know everyone knows about, well, maybe not everybody, but Stevie Richards people know about. What's funny is the 3rd anniversary show at the Rexplex in February of 2005, Test really was supposed to show up. Like, it was a hint that, like, Mick Foley's going to bring in Test, sports entertainer, but he really was supposed to show up, and then that didn't work out, so they went with the shitty Ebison thing they did. I believe Sabu was going to appear at Our Best, which was a week after the Rob Feinstein incident at the Rexplex, one of the biggest crowds we ever did, especially at the time, the day before WrestleMania 20. Big show, Joe and Jay Briscoe in a cage, and CM Punk and AJ Styles, pure title with Ricky Steamboat as the ref, and it was a good show, but I think Sabu was supposed to be there, and that didn't work out. But the name that you'd probably be surprised at the most is Hulk Hogan. And I'm not saying he was going to do a segment or a match or anything like that, but when I first started there was apparently talk about getting Hulk Hogan to do an autograph signing or something, and his price range was way too high for us at that point.
No.
Yeah. But that didn't work out. But yeah, like Hulk Hogan, Ring of Honor, wow.
Will Brooks wants to know, who did you want ROH to sign that they did not?
Well, first of all, if you ever had a video flagged by Ring of Honor, that was me. So send all your hate. But I was
Cat's out of the bag.
Right. I was trying to protect Ring of Honor's copyrights, goddammit. That's the internet. That's where we're supposed to make our audience and our money. I got to protect that shit. Well, it's a different story now. Anyway, as I'm going through YouTube and you see all these top 10 moves of so-and-so, I'm like, yeah, whatever. But I started seeing Takuya Tsuji, who goes by a lot of different names, El Blazer, etc. And I think he wrestles in Mexico right now. But this guy, you see these highlights and music videos of this guy, and you're like, wow, some of the shit he does is just amazing. So I remember Jimmy, who I used to work with in the office, and I were like, wow, we should talk about this guy. And I think that went across a couple different bookers. And I know there was talk about him the other year, and that didn't work out, visa issues or something. But he's one. And the other one would be Prince Devitt. Fergal Devitt, who wrestles in New Japan. He's an Irish wrestler, but he's a mainstay in Japan, and he's really good. The unfortunate part is a lot of guys in America see what happens in Japan and copies the moves, so they get the credit for it, like go to sleep or some shit. It's the same sort of idea. But Fergal Devitt in New Japan's pretty good, and I think anyone who's seen him knows that.
Ben from Birmingham wants to know, who are your favorite people to work with?
I know everyone wants to hear wrestler names here, and I do have a lot of wrestlers that I consider friends or at least acquaintances and guys that I get along great with. The Bravados, Colt Cabana, people you've seen on the show too, Delirious. Necro Butcher's incredibly nice. You'd be surprised just because of his personality on camera and everything. But there's a lot of unsung heroes too. The referees, Todd Sinclair and Paul Turner, I always enjoy seeing them and talking to them on the road. Zach Yeager, who did our security. You may have seen him on True TV doing that reality show. He's another one of my great friends. And I do want to say, above all, who made it fun, Sidney Ike, whose, I guess, unofficial title would be Vice President of Ring of Honor. But Sid helped out this show a lot when we wanted to do blogs or interviews and things like that. And he made everything fun. No one likes traveling and going on the road and flying through airports and rental cars and all that shit. But Sid was such a great, fun, positive person, singing, making jokes, and laughing at the goofy things I do and say. So Sid Ike would definitely be at the top of my list of one of the names. Maybe you want to hear some more wrestler names? I'll tell you one, Spanky. And I do want to get this story on camera because it meant a lot to me. When I was first starting to do Ring Crew, and we were in Massachusetts for It All Begins Again, which was Aries' first title defense against Colt Cabana, he came over to the ring truck and we're loading stuff in. And Spanky's a guy who had wrestled for Ring of Honor when we were first starting at Murphy Rec, gone off to WWE, was released, had a Japan tour, and came back to us. And he came around to each one of us and shook our hands and said thank you. And there's a lot of politics and food chain shit in wrestling, and it's a lot of bullshit. But this guy, I'm like, of all people, guy who's made it, been around the world, doesn't have to, of all people, do that and come around to people he doesn't even know and say thank you. That meant a lot to me. And luckily, I was able to tell him that years later when he came back for one of our anniversary shows in New York against Roderick Strong. And it seemed to really touch him that I still remembered that. But it meant a lot to me. So Spanky's another one of them that I would say is one of the best to work with.
All right, Rodney wants to know, did you ever bang Sonny, Eric?
No, I didn't. But I know who did, and that's all I'll say.
And last but not least, Orlando wants to know, what was your least and favorite matches?
Well, my least favorite match would be the main event of the 1-year anniversary show at the Elks Lodge in Queens, because AJ, Low-Key, and Paul London had a great three-way for the title, or actually a title shot, and then Xavier challenged the winner and London lost. That sucked. But then to follow it up with this huge train wreck, it was like Special K versus the Maximos and Mikey Whipwreck, Divine Storm, etc. And it was just a train wreck that went on way too long and was just horrible. That would probably be my least favorite. But my favorite, I mentioned Danielson and Kenta before, and I can't say enough good about that. But people may downplay Joe Kobashi as just a bunch of chops, but you weren't there, I don't think. I did the spotlight for that. I did the spotlight on Joe Kobashi, so not a lot of people can say that. So it was really special to be there. If you weren't there, I don't think you understood really how much it meant for Ring of Honor to have a legend like that going against someone who would be like the counterpart, Samoa Joe, for us. And maybe it was a bunch of chops. I wasn't a fan of the finish myself because I think strong style stuff, finishing it with a lariat after these 300-pound guys are suplexing each other on their heads a bunch of times. I don't know. I wasn't crazy about the finish either, but overall, that was a huge seller for us, and it deserved to be. So Joe Kobashi would definitely be up there as well. And thanks for asking your questions. If you have more questions, feel free to type them in. Go to Twitter, Facebook, wherever you might want to get your questions in. We'll answer some more. However, that's it for this Wrestling Roundtable. Next week, we're going to talk about PEDs and MMA and the internet wrestling community. That's you. So for the panel of Alex Payne, Martin LeConte, Will Brooks, Orlando O'Neill, and Rodney LeConte, thanks for asking those questions. I'm Eric Santamaria. Thank you, and join us on WrestlingRoundtable.com, Facebook, Twitter, etc.